Here we are. Shavua Tov.
Shabbat Tov.
How are
How are
you?
you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
You getting used to this or not getting used to this?
It's getting old actually.
I'm with you. My kids are saying the same thing. So
Yeah, I mean it's hard. It's what you gonna do? And I think we're in it for another little while. Not gonna end up like anytime soon. So
I don't know. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but
yeah, what do you think?
I mean, I don't know. To be honest with you, I think once you it can't all or nothing is something you can do. You can say nothing, but once you start making rules that you can do this and not that, and 10 people, 20 people, I think it's incredibly difficult for people to sort of keep that distance.
Right. No, it's like, I think that if they decide to actually loosen it up before summer, I think we're going to have a very big second wave because people are not going to listen during the summer. They're going to want to be out and enjoy the nice weather and everything else. I don't know.
We'll see.
Yep.
Who knows? But let's get back to our daf yomi. It's late on, let's say, Shabbat. Thank you all for being here. Today's daf, Shavua Tov, everyone. Today, please tell me if I'm not loud enough, and I can be louder, or I can change some volume or something. I don't know. We're good. Okay, I got a heads up there. So today's daf is in Masechet Shabbat. We still are, and today is daf Nun. So number 50. Dov told me he got to the bottom of Nun Tet Amud Bet. So that's where we're going to start. So 4 lines from the bottom, Amar Rava on Mem Tet Amud Bet. So let me just go back to the Mishnah. So the Mishnah, this parak, we're talking about whether you can not heat things on Shabbat, which was the previous parak, but whether you can use different kinds of insulation to keep your food hot on Shabbat. And there was a concept, which we're not going to talk about today, called things that are mosif heva. There's some insulation that can add heat, that can make organic new heat in the world, something to do with thermodynamics or something. And those are prohibited. But there are other categories of things that just maintain heat, and they are insulators, things like wool, or that was our example in the Mishnah, or mattresses, or things like that. Mats, not mattresses, mats. So the Mishnah said, and that's where we are today, that you can use gizei tzemer, you can use pieces of wool to insulate your pots, but you cannot carry those pieces of wool on Shabbat. Now, Rava says something which sounds very ridiculous on the surface. Says Rava, now 4 lines from the bottom, Amar Rava, lo shanu elos lo shelo taman behem. All the Mishnah means to say is you can't carry the wool on Shabbat if you didn't use them to insulate your pot. Meaning, wool is generally used to sew and make, coats or cloth or wool, whatever you do with wool, right? Tviya and ariga. And therefore it's muktzah. But if you use the wool to insulate your pot, then you've shown that you're using the wool for something on Shabbat, and then it should be permitted to use. So, avol taman bahen mitaltalinota. If you do use them for hatmana, you use these pieces of wool to insulate your pot, then you can carry them on Shabbat because you're using them for something that's permitted on Shabbat. Says the Gemara, that makes no sense. Eitve'ahu Rabbanan bar Yume. There was a Rabbanan bar Yume, which is a fascinating term in my opinion. Rabbanan bar Yume literally means a one-day rabbi or one-day student. So what's a Rabbanan bar Yume? I think we're all Rabbanan bar Yume. So the most cynical explanation, which I haven't seen someone said, is that a Rabbanan bar Yume is someone who just shows up every once in a while. He doesn't deserve to have a name. He's not part of the discussion regularly. They come when they feel like coming. And it's a little bit of a derogatory term. Rashi does not take it that way. Rashi says that Rabbanan bar Yume means it's your first day of school. So it's you just graduated college, you came to yeshiva or wherever you graduated from, and this is day number 1. So that's bar Yume means day 1. So really the rookies, the real fresh ones, which is a nicer thing. There's a Gemara in Chagiga, which we'll get to, I think, in like a year or so, right? A beautiful Gemara which says, I think it's Rav Ada bar Ava. I forgot who. One of my Mefarshim here bring it. But there's a Gemara in Chagiga which says that there was a Amor they called the Amora Bar Yume because he lived very far away from the yeshiva. And he used to travel, once Pesach was over, he would travel to come learn, and it would take him 3 months to get there. He would stay for 1 day, and then he'd have to go 3 months back home to get home for Sukkot. So he did all of that just to get there for 1 day, and the Gemara speaks about him very highly for that. So it's a very big compliment that he came, even though he only came once every 6 months, but that was he had a long commute, as it was. Now in days of Zoom, it would have been a whole new world.
Sometimes the people who are the freshest ask the best questions, though.
Could be, right. So ask this one. So we don't have a name, though. Humirabanan bar yume l'rava. The next words in the Mishnah are tomnin b'gizei tzemer ve'ein metaltalinotan, right? Which you just explained to mean you can carry gizei tzemer. You can do hatmana. You can insulate with gizei tzemer, and you could carry the gizei tzemer. But if you didn't use them to insulate, then you can't carry them, right? Which is what Rava just read in the Mishnah. But the next words are ketzad hu oseh. How do you take the tzemer off the pot if you used it for hatmana? And the Mishnah said, "Notel kisoy ve'hin noflot," that you take off the lid of the pot and the pieces of wool will fall off. But the implication of the Mishnah is very clear that we're talking about not carrying the wool that's used for hatmana. It's not that the Mishnah is saying you can use wool for hatmana and carry it, and if it's not used for hatmana, you can't carry it. The Mishnah is clearly saying that the wool you use for hatmana can't be moved, right? You can only move it indirectly. So clearly, it's not what the Mishnah means. Ella yitmar hachitmar. You know what? If we have to quote Rava, this is what we meant. Rava. This is what Rava really said. Amar Rava, lo shanu ella shelo yichadan lahatmana. The only time that our Mishnah makes it sound is implying you cannot carry wool on Shabbat. Again, wool is a thing that's generally used. You take wool and you make it into string. I don't know what the words are here. You make it. You make it into threads, and you sew with it or you knit with it. You make things with it, which are prohibited on Shabbat. So you generally can't carry raw wool on Shabbat. But that's only true if you haven't designated it for insulation. If you take this bag of wool and you say, I'm going to use this, week after week to insulate my food, then metaltalinotan, because you have clearly changed the designation. You've changed the use of this thing to something which is mutar on Shabbat. And like we've seen many times, if you generally can override the stam, the expected usage of something by designating it for something else. And we'll discuss that more today. Itmar nami, in fact, we have another statement like that. Kiyata Rav Amar Yaakov Amar Basi ben Shaul Amar Rebbe. So he now quoted this ultimately in the name of Rebbe. Lo shanu, in our Mishnah, which it says you cannot carry the wool, ela shel yichdan lahatmana, where you didn't designate them to be used for insulation. If you designate them for this purpose, then you are allowed to carry them on Shabbat. They're no longer books. Ravina said, I have another explanation. That in fact, maybe when Rava said that you're allowed to carry wool that's used for insulation, he meant all wool that's used for insulation. Why did our Mishnah then say that how do you move the pot? You have to just move the top and get it off. It's because there's a special kind of wool that remains muksa even when you use it for insulation. And that is bishel heftik shanu. That's wool that's used in what's called a heftik. Rashi says a heftik is like an industrial box. Rashi is like a box where you basically have designated that you're using this wool for business, not for hatmana. So if it's this kind of professional usage of wool, that remains muksa even if you've used it one time. Rashi says that's clearly, Rashi has a word in French, tash. I don't know what tash means, but tash. So anyways, Rashi, it's basically, if it's industrial, then it remains muksa, because clearly you're going to use it for wool for the purposes of making thread. But otherwise, if it's stam wool, then it's okay to use it on Shabbat if you've used it for insulation. And Tani Nami Hachim even have a braita which says this very clearly. Gizei tzemer shall heftik. If it's gizei tzemer that are industrial, ein metaltalinotan, you cannot carry them on Shabbat. But im hitkinan balabayit l'shtamesh b'hen metaltalinotan. Even there, where it's industrial, If the Baal Bayit specifically set them aside and said, I'm going to use them on Shabbat, then you can use them on Shabbat. So again, you can always override what's generally done with something. But the point of these Mishnayot and Braitot is that you have to go after the general usage. And the general usage of this wool is for business, basically, and things that are muktzah, and not for hatmana. Now, getting into a little bit more detail of this specific question about when you take something which has a general purpose, which is muktzah, but you can use it for something else that's not muktzah. So what does it take in order to change the status of something? So Tana Rabba Bar Brachana, we're around 10 lines down, James, on the top of Daf Nun. So Tana Rabba Bar Brachana, Kamei de Rav. Rabba Bar Brachana said in front of Rav the following braita. It says, Charuyot shel dekel. The Charuyot shel dekel are the, I don't know if anyone's seen this, like in Israel, they use these for schach, right? So what they take is the branches from the side of the palm tree, right, the lulav tree, and the branches have a spine, and then they have, things that come out. So after the sides come out, you're left with the spine. And the spine is really a branch, but it's very, very hard. And over time, the longer it stays on the tree, the harder it gets. And so very often they would use that as firewood because even though it's a branch, it can burn and give you a lot of energy. So let's say you have the Charuyot shel dekel. And generally, if you bundle these up in a pile and you're going to use them for your fire, right? You can use them which is muktzah, of course, right? But let's say you were gardan la'itzim, you cut them down in order to use them as wood. Again, they're not literally wood, but they're wood, but they're branches, but they're very, very hard. You plan on using them for firewood, which will make them muktzah, but then you decide, you know what, it's a pile of logs essentially, let me sit on them, I'll use them as stools. So nimlach aleim liyeshiva, you decide to use them for sitting. Says the Braita, saruch lekasher, if you want to change their designation for Shabbat, you have to do an action. You have to tie them together, weave them together like a bed or something, or like a mat, like a couch, in a way that makes a distinct designation that these are not for firewood. Because if they're for firewood, they're muktzah. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, ein tzarich lekasher. You don't have to tie them together. You don't have to tie them together. You still don't get it, James? You got it? I'm 12 lines down, 14 lines down. You don't need to tie them together because as long as your intention is to take this wood, and it's not really wood, right? Take these branches and use them for sitting, which is a normal use of them because they're strong. Then as long as that was your intention before Shabbat, you don't need to make an action to actually designate that. You just need to know that you meant that. Hu tanila. Now he said over this braita, who Amarla and Rabba Bar Brachana said, halacha ki Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. That the halacha is like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. That if you take something that's main purpose is, say, muktzah, that you decide to use it for something else, you don't need to make an act to designate that, for it not to be muktzah. You just need to think it before Shabbat. Now, if you didn't think it before Shabbat, you're in trouble. But as long as you thought it before Shabbat and said, let me use these branches as a stool or as a mat, it's not muktzah and you can use it on Shabbat. That's the psak that Rabbi Bar Chana said in the name of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Now, Itmar. Let's sort of see what everyone else thinks about it. So Rav says, kosher. Rav says, I disagree. If you want to use the branches of the tree to sit on Shabbat, you have to tie them together before Shabbat. You have to do an action to make it clear. Shmuel says, choshev. You don't need to do it. The pasuk like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, you just need to think that you're going to use it for sitting. Rav Asi Amar, Rav Asi is a third opinion, and Rav Asi is an Amora. Rav Asi says, Yoshev afal pi shelo kisher. If you sit on these branches before Shabbat starts, you have shown that you're using these branches as a place to sit. And so even if you didn't tie them together, and afal pi shelo chishev, even if you don't think that I'm going to use them on Shabbat, the fact that at some point before Shabbat you physically use these as a function that's mutar on Shabbat is enough for you to change the status of these things. So says the Gemara, that's a third opinion. We haven't heard that before. Bishma Rav who the Amar Tanakama. Rav saying what the Tanakama said in the previous Braita, that you have to tie them together. Shmuel Nami who the Amar Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Shmuel's pasuk Reb Shimon ben Gamliel that you just need to think about it. You don't need to tie them together. Ela Rav Asi the Amar Kaman. Rav Asi has some middle opinion. It's not really middle Because Rav Asi is in some ways being more makel than Shmuel. You don't even need to think about it. You just need to show that you've used it for that, right? But it's possible, this is not so clear, that according to Rav Asi, if you thought about it, it wouldn't be enough. Probably it wouldn't be, right? So in some ways it's worse, it's harder than Shmuel, in some ways it's easier. But as long as you used it before, Rav Asi says that's enough. Which Tana is Rav Asi relying on? You can't argue with two Tanaim. Says the Gemara, Hu da'amar ki hai Tana. In fact, there's another Braita. And the Braita says the following, Titania. Another very important Braita. This is a Tosefta in this Masechet. It says on Shabbat, Yotzin bepikurin ubetzipa. You can go out on Shabbat with a pikurin and a tzipa. Rashi explains that a pikurin and a tzipa are different. One's flax and one is some kind of other wool that are little pieces of flax and wool that you fashion into a bandage. So let's say on Shabbat you have a wound and you're afraid it's going to bleed on your clothing. So you wrap this bandage around it on Shabbat. So now the problem is, of course, that it should be muksa because wool is muksa, right? So says the Braita later, you can use these things on Shabbat, bisman shetzov'an. Now the Braita later is dealing with the fact that it's not called carrying because you're wearing it as a Band-Aid. But the point the Braita adds here is that you have to tzov'an. Tzov'an Rashi means not that you dye them, but that like you dip them in oil to designate that this is a bandage. This is going to protect your skin. V'karchan b'mishicha. And you tie them with a string to make it like a round thing or to make it together. So you have to support them. Basically, if you fashion this piece of wool or this piece of linen into a bandage before Shabbat, then you're allowed to carry it and wear it and use it on Shabbat. The lo tzavan, if you didn't dip it in oil, b'shemen, I'll add. The lo karchan b'mishicha, ein yotzim b'hem b'Shabbat. You can't go out with them on Shabbat. So far, this is not telling us either way. But continues the Braita, if you use this for even one moment before Shabbat started to be a bandage on covering your wound, then then this is exactly what Rav Asi said, that the fact that you used it for this gives the designation to the thing that it's going to be used as a bandage, even though it's a piece of wool that you normally would use to make a shirt, right, or a suit, and would be muksa. In this case, it's mutar because you used it once like that before Shabbat. And so this is the Braita which supports the opinion of Rav Asi. I'll just point out, it's too good to give up, that Tosfot has a beautiful explanation. He says that a tzipa is a shetel. It's or in the words of, someone says these words, a pe'ad nachrit, as they call it in Israel, right? So that a tzipa is where you actually take some linen and use it for a bald person to cover their head with hair coming down. He makes it sound like it's for a man, so I don't know if any woman would be caught dead wearing this. But basically, it's a thing that's used that generally use wool, again, to make string, and to make a suit. But here they used it to make fake hair so that a person looked less bald, I guess. Either way, it's the same.
Go back just, is this the same Rabbi Shimon that we had before, who doesn't really hold by Muksa, the Shimon ben Gamliel?
No.
This is a different Shimon?
Yeah.
But they both seem to be Mekel on Muksa?
Well, so Rabbi Shimon's not being Mekel. He says as long as you have a machshava, right? You have to think about it.
Okay.
So the question is what's enough to change the status? So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, he's not saying there's no muksa. You have to think about it in order to do it, right?
Right. You don't have to do an action.
You don't have to do an action. And the Tanakama held you had to do an action. And Rav Asi, who holds like this other unnamed Tana, says that you don't have to do the action to make it into a kli, but you have to use an action to show that your intent was to use it on Shabbat, which is different, right? So remember, let's say you take these chariyot shel dekel. According to the Tanakama, you have to tie them together into a form that would be a chair on Shabbat, for example.
Right.
According to Rav Asi, which is how we paskin, you don't have to do that, but you have to show that you sat down on it before Shabbat. So you just sit down on this pile of wood, that's enough, right? Even though you haven't actually sewn it together and made anything out of it. The Tanakama requires you to make it into a form that's usable on Shabbat. Now, Amar Rav Ashi, James, if you don't have it yet, we're in the middle of the page, exactly in the middle. Says Rav Ashi, Afanan nami tanina. In fact, there's another Braita which supports this opinion of Rav Asi. The Braita says the following. Let's say you have kash. Let's say you have kash. I didn't hear your question, James.
Sure.
So do you have to use it before Shabbat in preparation for Shabbat, or just have you used it for that same purpose that you now want it?
So the second one, you have to have used it for the same purpose. So basically,
Even if you have no intention of using it for that purpose on Shabbat.
correct. Correct.
And
So
now you can change your
You
mind.
just happened to sit on it, so now you can sit on it.
correct, because what you've shown is that this is not a piece of wood that's going to be used in a building. This is a chair or a potential chair, right? And you could have things that are multi uses, right? It's not like everything has to have only one use. But I think the point is you have to show that you had thought, or that you not physically thought, that you had used this for a function that could be done on Shabbat, which is sitting in this case. Look at the next case, which is similar. Let's say you have kash, right? You have a bundle of hay. So, of course, the general uses of hay are to put into bricks, for example, like in Egypt, remember? Or to feed to your animals, right? Which I guess is a little different function. But usually, because that you can do on Shabbat, but most hay is used for muktzah, right? Is used to build. And so you can't touch hay on Shabbat. But let's say you have a bundle of hay and it's al gabi amita. You're sitting, it's placed on top of your bed because you had a small house, you know where else to put it. And you decide that you want to sleep on this on Shabbat. Says the Braita, lo yina'aneu biyado. You shouldn't mix it up, meaning, right, it's a bundle of hay. You can't sleep on a bundle of hay. You have to flatten it out. You shouldn't use your hand to do that because it's muktzah. So you shouldn't move it with your hand. Aval min na'aneu bigufo, but you can do it with a shinoi. You can do it, what Rashi says, kalach yad. You can do it with your back, with your body, meaning you can rub up against it and sit on it and move it around and lay together so that the hay flattens out. And that would be okay. So you're not supposed to touch it normally, but you can touch it in an unusual way. Aval, so meaning because it's muktzah. Aval im hayam ma'achal behema, if the hay was designated for animal feed, which is mutar on Shabbat, o shahayalav kar o sadimi ba'od yom, or you put a mattress or a bed or a pillow on it during the day, which implied that you're going to use it as part of sleeping, then even though you didn't say anything, minaneo biyado shmamina, minaneo biyado period, then you can actually move with your hands. And this is the opinion of Rav Asi, which is that as long as you've done something to it before during the day that shows that you're using it for a purpose that's permitted on Shabbat, either sitting on it or sleeping on it, then in all those cases it's not muktzah, shmamina, even though it's a bundle of hay, which the primary function is something that's muktzah. Ask the Gemara while we're on this point, who is the Tana who argues with Reb Shimon ben Gamliel? Meaning, who's the Tana Kam? Man Tana, the Palagalev Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, and says that machshava is not enough and you need to actually do an action. That's Rabbi Chanina ben Akiva. What's the story? Very interesting story. L'chiata Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came to Eretz Yisrael, he said, Amar Zeiri, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Pam achat halach Rabbi Chanina ben Akiva l'makom echad. Right? There are not a lot of details here. Once upon a time, Rabbi Chanina ben Akiva, well, I don't know if he's Rabbi Akiva's son, but I guess why not, right? He went to a certain place, we don't know where his place was, and he found matzah chariyot shel dekel shegadrum l'shon eitzim. He saw that there were these pieces of a palm tree that were cut down in order to use for firewood, which would make them muktzah. But he realized when he looked around the shul that there weren't enough seats. So he said to his talmidim, "Va'amar lahem l'talmidav tzu'u v'chashvu." Go and think. Now, think here is an active thing, right? It's maybe state that you plan to use these pieces of wood to sit on Shabbat, kedei sheneshev aleihem l'machar, so that he can sit on them. We can sit on them tomorrow. We don't have enough chairs. We're going to be relying on these pieces of wood for our backup chairs. Go and state your intention to sit on these chairs tomorrow. Why couldn't he do what? Say it? I'm guessing that he wasn't in front of them. I would have my guess, meaning he knew that these existed or they were somewhere there. He could have zoomed it. Yeah, I guess. But he said, go and designate these chariyot shel dekel for chairs for Shabbat. Continue the story. Let me just finish the story because if we stopped here, you'd have the wrong impression. Continued, I guess this is still Ula, right? Rav Dimi, in the name of Ziri. I didn't know if the story happened with a wedding hall or with a house of mourning. Meaning, I'm not sure if the reason that he allowed them to do this was because they went to this event to be Menachem Avel someone or to go celebrate a wedding. However, says the Gemara, the point is, from the fact that he provided that detail in the story, I now can learn that it's dafka beta eva or beta mishta de turidi. It's dafka in a place where the students or the people are very busy. They can't just go and build these branches into chairs because they're too busy dancing at the wedding or being menachem avel. And that's where Rabbi Chanina ben Akiva said it's enough to think about it. But in most cases, in a normal situation, when you're at home, if Rabbi Chanina ben Akiva is saying, if you can, you have to tie together the chairs, the branches, in order to make a chair, in order for it to be permitted on Shabbat. Aval hacha, kasher in lo kasher lo. You have to tie them together in order to be useful, but if you don't tie them together, you're not allowed to use it on Shabbat.
How would they be having a wedding on Friday? They do.
Good question, but to be honest with you, it was very common to have weddings on Friday afternoon.
Really?
Yeah, it was very common, and still is.
It's because people were poor and it was a way to save money to use the Seudat Shabbat as a Seudat Mitzvah.
Makes sense. Okay.
Some people do it today. It's very nice. In Israel, I think there's, you do Friday afternoon, right? And then you have the Shabbat Seudah as the wedding.
Oh, I see. I never heard of that, but that's cool.
Anyways, Amar Yehuda, let's keep going. Amar Yehuda, Machnis Adam Aleiku Bato Efer, V'oseh Bo Kol Tzorchav. Let's say a person is worried that on Shabbat they're gonna, maybe they have some unruly guests from the wedding who might, for all throw up or something or whatever, and they want to have some dirt in order. So Efer is ashes, right? In order to cover what someone might do on their dirt floor, or they have a pet that's not well behaved, or a child maybe. So you bring in a kupa, right, a box of ashes, and you dump them in the corner of your house, and you can use them on Shabbat to cover up anything you need to cover. Because now, afer is usually muksa, of course, right? Because you don't usually use afer for building or something, or spitting. That's what Rashi says. Thank you. But I was being more creative. But yes, spitting is definitely included. So a person can bring that in before Shabbat and do whatever they want with it. Darish Mar Zutra, Mishmei de Mar Zutra, Rabba, or Zutra said the name of senior Mar Zutra. That means you have to dump it in the corner to show that you're going to use this later on Shabbat. But if you dump it in the middle of the room, then how do we know that you want the afer to be used to cover things up? Maybe you just want the afer to be part of your floor, which you can't use. So you can't dig up your floor to cover spit on Shabbat. Remember, they had dirt floors. So therefore, you have to put the afer, the ashes, in the corner. That must be going according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. According to Rabbanan, it's not enough just to put it in the corner and say, I'm going to use this afer to cover when people spit on Shabbat. You have to do an action to it, right? Amar l'Rav Papa, no. Even the Rabbanan, afilo tema Rabbanan. Ad kan look Amar Rabbanan's being a maaseh lamidi debar avida be'maaseh. Right? When you have pieces of wood and you're going to use them to sit on as a chair, you can tie them together and make it into a chair. But what are you going to do for ashes to designate these ashes are useful for covering your spit? You can't do anything. What are you going to do to the ashes? You can put up a sign. That's not a maaseh, right? That's a machshava. So there's no action that's relevant here. And since there's no action that's relevant, according to the Chachamim even, midi de lo bar me'avda ba maaseh lo, there you don't need to do an action as long as you're you're designating them. You put them in the corner, which clearly shows that I didn't have shovels or pails. You put them in the corner, and that shows that. So that's what putting them in the corner does. Basically, you're showing that they're not part of your floor. This is like spare stuff in case anyone's unruly, right? But then once you've done that, you can use them on Shabbat, and it's not muktzah.
Can't you just spit and then cover it?
You can spit on the floor. You can then pick up some of the ashes with your shovel and cover the floor.
Yeah.
Not that you're spitting into the ashes. You're using the ashes on Shabbat.
Yeah.
Ema kitznai. I'm sorry?
Pre-Shabbos spit, just to show that if somebody spits, you can use them.
I'm not sure that counts, right? What about the rest of the ashes? The ashes you used are... Okay, name a kitanai. Let's say it's a machloket tanaim. The Braita says the following. B'chol chafinet hakelim. Now, this is the very common issue that people worry about is how do you wash your dishes on Shabbat? What kind of soap do you use? So says the Braita, you can wash your dishes with any kind of soap, except chutz mikli kesef begartikon. If you can't clean your kli kesef with gartikon. The gartikon, Rashi says, is alus. I don't know what alus is in French, or if that's a word in French, but he says it's some kind of very hard, I wouldn't say it's a clay, it's like a residue that's at the bottom of a kli, and I guess it oxidizes, and they would scrape their silver, and it would clean off the silver, but in the process of cleaning off the silver, it would also take off a layer of the silver. And that's called ma'ich, that's called grinding down. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbat. So that's an Isra Malacha on Shabbat. So you can't use gartikon, for your kesef, but neter v'chol mutar. But presumably other things like neter and chol, sand and lye, whatever lye is, right? Other kinds of finely ground things that would take off dirt, but you would scrape with, that would be mutar to do on Shabbat. So now that's one braita. So it says you're allowed to do it. Hatanya, there's another braita that says neter v'chol asur, that you can't clean your pots with sand on Shabbat. So my lav lakamifli, presumably the argument is about whether sand is muktzah or not. Remember, sand is usually used to make bricks and to make, mortar or whatever. So it should be something that's muktzah. The question is, can you use it to wash your dishes? My lav lakamifli, the marsavar b'ina maaseh. You need to do an action to make something not muktzah, and there's no action you could do to sand. How could you do an action to it to make it useful for washing dishes? There's no change. And marsavar lo b'ina maaseh. You don't need an action. You just have a machshava. Says the Gemara, no, that's not the machloket. Lo, it could be the kuliyama lo b'ina maaseh. Maybe everybody agrees that you don't need an action. The question here is whether sand will rub away the silver from your silver pot. Presumably, there's a chance that it will. And if it does, it should be asur because you're not allowed to rub away a silver pot on Shabbat. That's called destroying something. The question here is whether this is your intention. Since your intention, of course, is to wash the pot, not to rub it away, this falls into the machloket between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda about davar she'eino mitkavein. So maybe the issue here is not muksa, it's whether destroying, or not destroying, but rubbing away the silver is an isser melacha. V'lo kasha, ha Rabbi Yehuda, davar she'eino mitkavein asur, and therefore you can't even use sand on your silver kelim on Shabbat. Ha Rabbi Shimon, davar she'eino mitkavein mutar. And remember, the reisha would be asur because it's for sure going to happen. And Rabbi Shimon agrees that even if it's davar she'eino mitkavein, if it's for sure going to happen, meaning if it's for sure going to wear away the vessel, that's a psik reisha, and it's asur. Says the Gemara, 1 second. You're now saying that the Tana who says that you can wash your silver dishes with sand on Shabbat is Rabbi Shimon because it's a davar she'eino mitkavein if it ruins the vessel. But then ema seifa, the next words in the Braita are, but you can't take a shower. You can't wash your hair with it. You can't wash your hair with sand on Shabbat. I'm not sure how clean your hair would get, right? Now, what's the problem with washing your hair on Shabbat? The problem is that you're going to pull out your hair, right? You're not allowed to pull out hair on Shabbat. Rabbi Shimon, Mishra Kashari. It should be mutar to do it if it's Rabbi Shimon. It's not. Rabbi Shimon very clearly said, and this is a Mishnah in Nazir. A Nazir, now remember, Nazir also is someone, not because of Shabbat, but Nazir is prohibited from pulling out their hair. So can a Nazir take a shower when they're a Nazir? So says the Mishnah, Nazir chofeif umifaspeis. A Nazir can definitely, chofeif, which means like, I don't know how to translate chofeif, but you can muscle up your hair. You have a translation from Livia?
Rub.
To shampoo your hair.
To what?
To shampoo?
Right, shampoo, but I think the meaning here is more like doing, moving your hand around.
Rub.
Rub. Okay, rub we heard. Umifaspeis, which is similar, right? You can move it around. Avalos sorek, but you can't use a fine comb because you're going to for sure pull out your hair. But the Gemara there, we're talking about washing it or rubbing it with sand. So there the Mishnah says you're allowed to do it with a Nazir. How could our Braita say you can't do it on Shabbat if it's Rabbi Shimon? Ella, you're right. According to Rabbi Shimon, you can wash your hair on Shabbat because the fact that the hair is falling out is not what your intention is, right? You can't use a comb because with a comb it's guaranteed to fall out, and that's a psik reisha. But you can wash it if it's not guaranteed to fall out. But the discussion about whether it's mutar or not is Hava Rabbi Yehuda, who has davar she'eino mitkavein is asur. And in fact, there are two Tanaim, Alibad Rabbi Yehuda. Hi Tana, Li Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Garir. Where am I? That one Tana, according to Rabbi Yehuda, holds that you're allowed to do it. The High Tana, Li Rabbi Yehuda Savar, Lo Garir. One Tana holds you're not allowed to do it. And the reason is because one Tana holds that something that's a machshava, you have to do a machshava. You can't, it's not enough not to do it. Meaning, you can't, Rabbi Yehuda holds you need an action usually. But if there's something you can't do an action to, like sand, the question then is, according to the Tanaim, is it enough to then think about it? Or do you need to, in fact, still not use that thing on Shabbat because you can't do an action? Says the Gemara. Now, b'mayu kimta, so how did you finally explain this Braita? That's Rabbi Yehuda. Well, Ema Seifa, look at the next words in the Braita. The Braita says you can't wash your hair with sand on Shabbat because you're going to pull it out, which we said is Rabbi Yehuda. Aval panav yadav raglav mutar. You can wash your face and your arms. How could you wash your face? What if you have a beard? The hair's going to fall out of your beard. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, why is it mutar to wash your face? Right? Ha me avar se'ar. Maybe we're talking about a child who doesn't have a beard. Bi'isha, a woman. Bisari, someone who doesn't grow hair. Someone who doesn't grow hair, doesn't have any testosterone. And so that's where you're allowed to do it. But it is true that if you, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who holds a davar she'ein mitkaven is asur, if you had facial hair, you couldn't clean it with sand because you would pull it out on Shabbat. Amar Rav Yehuda. Now, getting back to our Shabbos, our earlier issue of what's muksa, says Rav Yehuda, afar levinta shari, that if you have dirt, afars, right, ashes, not ashes, a flour-like, basically, that's from a levena, from a brick, right? So you ground up a brick and you have I don't know what you call it, but dust, basically. You can use that on Shabbat to wash your hair or your beard, whatever you want, because you don't have to worry that it's going to come out. It's like sand, right? Where am I? Afar levinta shari. Amar Rav Yosef, kuspa de yasmin shari. If you want to use kuspa, yasmin sounds like jasmine to me, but Rashi says it means the dust from the sumsumim, from the sesame. So that's another thing. They had different kinds of shampoo back in that day, right? So that was the kind of shampoo. That's also mutar on Shabbos. Amar Rava, and Rava said, Efer pilpuli shari. If you have dust from peppers, that's also mutar. I assume it means the pepper seeds that you grind them up. That's also mutar to use on Shabbat. Amar of Sheshet, and says of Sheshet, Barda is also shari. You can use Barda on Shabbat. My Barda. What is Barda? Asked the Gemara. Amar of Yosef, well, it's a very, very special shampoo. Tilta ahala, a third aloe. I think ahala means aloe. Tilta asa, a third is hadas, myrtle. The tilta sigli, and the third will be sigli. Someone says sigli, I think Tosha says sigli is lavender. Rashi says, I have a Rashi here, that in Lashon Yishmael it's yasmin. But in French, it's violet. I don't know what that means. Violet. Okay. Violi. Okay, there we go. So anyways, this mixture is fine. You can use it on Shabbat. Amr Reb Nechemia Bar Yosef, Kol Hecha Deleka Ruba Ala Shaperdami. As long as you don't have a majority of aloe, then it's okay. And I guess, and again, these are all what these Amoraim were just telling you their favorite brand of shampoo, basically, right? These are all the tricks they use. The main point is it can't be something that's guaranteed to pull out your hair. It can only be a safek. And then as long as the davar she'ein mitkaven, then it's mutar. Now, Rav Sheshet. They asked Rav Sheshet, Mao lefzoa zeitim b'Shabbat. Can you crush zeitim on Shabbat? Rashi understands this means that you have immature zeitim which are not edible. But as we all know, if you bruise them, or you bang them against a rock, then they become softer and you can eat them. Can you do that on Shabbat, or are you making a food edible? Okay? That's Rashi's pshat. And Rashi understands that the answer was, can you even do this during the week? Because when you crush them, you're gonna lose all the juice, you're gonna lose some of the meat, and you're wasting food basically. So you're allowed to waste food. That's how Rashi understands it. Tosa says doesn't make any sense. Why? It's a non sequitur. But Tosa says they used to use these olives to wash their hair also on Shabbat. Right? Let's say you ran out of shampoo. Can you crush olives into your hair basically to use the juice to moisten it, to be a nice hair gel? So but the same question is: are you allowed to do it b'chol? Because you're taking a food, and you're using it for non-food. So kasaver mishum hefsid ochlin. We thought that his question was, can you do it because you might be destroying food? Lema pliga de Shmuel. This seems to argue with Shmuel. Did Amar Shmuel, as we had last Masechet in Brachot, osa adam kol tzarcho bepat. Shmuel said, you're allowed to do whatever you want with pot. Let's say you need something to hold up your computer for your Zoom or to sit on. You can sit on a piece of bread if you need to. You're allowed to use it for any function, even if it's not eating. Well, that's not a question proof because pot lo meisa, right? If you use your bread to hold up your computer, then when you're done with your shear, you can eat the piece of bread, right? But this olives, hani meisi. Once you rub it in your hair, no one's going to eat those olives, right? So that's the question. So Itmar, that was the question. Amimar Marzutra Ravashi Havi Yatvi. Now once Amimar and Marzutra and Ravashi were sitting together, right? They had their brunch or whatever. I did a cameo barda, and the host brought some barda. Remember, barda was this beautiful mixture of aloe and hadas. What's hadas name? There's myrtle and violet. Beautiful, beautiful thing. So Amimar Ravashi macho. So Amimar Ravashi took some and anointed themselves. They put it in their hair. They gelled their hair back. And Marzutra lo masha. But Marzutra didn't take it. Amar le, they said, lo savar lamar. It was on Shabbos. Amar le, lo savar lamar, lo had amar sheshet barda shari. You don't hold that Rav Sheshet said that you're allowed to use barda on Shabbat. Amar lahu, Rav Mordechai said to them, bar minei demar, don't forget about him. He doesn't even use things, he doesn't even use hair gel during the week. Why not? Because Tanya, he is of the opinion of the following Braita, which says, a person can, if you unfortunately have some stool or some sweat or a wound, you can rub that off your skin and you can use maybe deodorant or something to cover that scent. But if you're just doing it to be more beautiful, then you're not allowed to do it, even during the week. The Rashi says it's because it's a man and it's a question of being Yilbash Big Day Isha, right? You're acting like a woman in this way. But that you can't even beautify yourself during the week. You can do it if it's to get rid of a stench or, if you need to do it, but you can't do it just to make yourself more beautiful. And so that's why he didn't use hair gel on Shabbat. Not because it's an Isra of Shabbat, because he never used hair gel. The Innu, now the ones who did use it, Keman Savru, who do they hold like? Tanya, the following Braita, which says that, you can be beautiful. You can even wash your face and your hands every day. Take a shower every day if you need to. That's not considered too bad. B'shvil kono, you're doing it in order to be beautiful for your Creator. Mishum shenemar kol pa'el Hashem l'ma'aneo. God created everything for God's benefit. You can be beautiful for your Creator, and it seems like most people paskin this way, but not in some yeshivas. They're very mach.
They think it's a sort to take a shower every day.
So whatever. Again, obviously it has to do with society and has to do with what people are used to and what the smell you're used to. But you can do it if it's societally necessary. But there was a hakpada, according to some, not everyone, of doing things that are just to beautify yourself, not for function. Okay, you can choose how you want. Our Mishnah continued. Let's do the last. We have a few more minutes, even though it's 9:45. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, "Kupa, if you have a container, this is a little tricky, right? Let's say you have a kupa, a box. You put your pot inside the box. You put the insulation around it. Says the Mishnah, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, you should be matal tzidav and notel. You should put it on its side. You shouldn't. Now, what most understand this mean is you shouldn't take the pot out of the box, because once you take the pot out, all the feathers or all the wool are going to come together, and you're going to lose the spot where you put it before. But what you should do is you should just turn the box over and scoop out the food without taking out the pot. Okay, that's one way to understand it. Because you want to leave the pot intact so that it doesn't lose its spot. Says the Gemara, we're going to explain this. Amar Reb Abba, Amar Bechir Barashi, Hakol Modim. Everybody agrees that if you take the pot out, and one second, when nothing's halach here. If you're nitzkakalel aguma, if you lose your hole, right, your empty spot where the pot was, then sha'asur lahachzir. you can't put it back in on Shabbat. And the reason you can't put it back in is that the material is muktzah. And so you can't move it side to side in order to put something in there. So if you lose the spot, you can't put it back. Where am I? Asur lachzir. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. It's not, we learned in the Mishnah, Chachamim omrim notel machzir. You come and say you can take a pot out and put it back. What's going on? If you haven't ruined the hole, meaning you left an open hole, then why would anyone say you can't put the pot back? Ella, it must lav afal pijin kakla haguma. It must be the Chachamim are saying you can put your pot back in the feathers, let's say, or in the wool. Even if you lost the spot, you can make a new spot. It says where no. It has to be where you did not lose the spot. It's a takana. Marsa is afraid that shaman guma, and then you're gonna move the things aside to make a new hole, and therefore you can never put it back. Marsavar and Chachamim hold ein choshishim, and that's how we pass. Amar Rav Huna. Now says Rav Huna, final thing today. Hi silikusta. Silikusta, Rashi says, is some kind of grass that was very pretty and smelled good. And what they would do is they would take it out of the ground before Shabbat, and then they would put it in like I always think when I learn this Gemara about when people used to smoke back in the day, they would have like those pots where you would put your ashes in that were full of like pebbles and dirt. You know what I'm talking about? Sometimes you put your finger in it as a kid and you didn't know what it was. So that's what it sounds like. Yeah, but not, they often, they would be filled with stuff so you can put out the fire, not an empty ashtray. They have them like in places, I guess now people don't smoke as much. So it's like dirt basically, but they would put this into that. So it couldn't be in the ground, right? Because that's not mutter on Shabbat, but it would hold it.
Yeah.
And so said Rav Huna, you can datza shalfa v'hadr datza. You can, put it into the dirt, not the dirt, that's why it's not dirt. You put it into the afer, right? The pebbles. You can take it out and wave it and show it to people and then put it back in on Shabbat, right? It's not considered Rashi says it's not considered making a digging into a thing, okay? Because you took it in and out. So basically there's a hole that exists for this plant. But says Rav Huna, if you datza shalfa v'hadr datza, then sharia. If you put it in and out so that you loosen up the dirt that you're putting into, then it's mutar. Yilav asur. But if this dust that you're putting it into is not loose, then you're not allowed to put it in on Shabbat. Because you're basically digging a hole on Shabbat, right? The words Rashi use are mezes afar. You're moving dirt. So if it's very loosely packed, then putting something in doesn't really move that much around. But if it's densely packed, then it's an isser. And so before Shabbat, you have to take it in and out several times to loosen up the dirt. Amar Shmuel, says Shmuel, I'll tell you a similar principle. Hai sakina, right? Let's say they used to have bricks, of course, that would hold up their building, but between the bricks was mortar, and the mortar often crumbles. This is definitely true even to today. So let's say your mortar was very thin. You could take a knife and push it into the mortar between the two bricks to store it, right? And it would be flat. A knife has a flat blade, right? It would go into that area if it wasn't so dense. So let's say you have a sakina, you have a knife, the beni orvi that you're putting between the bricks in your wall. If your datza shalfa v'hadr datza shari, again, if you take it in and out and loosen up this this mortar before Shabbat, then it's mutter to put it on Shabbat. But ilav asir, if not, you can't do it on Shabbat. Again, you're not allowed to put it into something that's too dense. Marzutra v'itemer Ravashi Amar. Marzutra said, or some say Ravashi, that the gordita dekani in the base of a tree, right, where you have like reeds, you have a decal. What's a decal again?
Palm tree.
Palm tree. Thank you. So in the base of the palm tree, if you've ever seen a palm tree, and it's true about many trees, you have many little plants coming out from the roots that go up a foot or two from the ground that circle it. So let's say you want to store something there on Shabbat. So you want to put your knife or put your bag into that. It's like a hidden place, essentially. So you're allowed to put things there. The gordita dekani shaper dami. Amalei of Mordechai the Rava, mother of Katina tiyufta. Says of Mordechai to Rava, Rav Kadina asked a question on all these opinions because we have a Mishnah. This is a fascinating Mishnah. Let's say you have a lefet or it's no notes, or a lefet is someone help me out here. These are turnip, I think, is a lefet. That's known as a radish, maybe, something like that.
A lefet is a turnip.
A lefet is a turnip, right. That's known, I think, as a radish or something.
Root is a radish, yes.
Okay, so let's say you have lefet or tznon. You want to store them to eat them later in the season. So you dig them into the dirt. You dig a hole under your geffen, under your olive tree, your grape tree, and you put them underground to store, right? So it's like a storage. You don't want them to grow. You don't want them to reattach, but you want them to be somewhere secure. Maybe the animals won't get them. It'll stay cool. So says the Mishnah, Im haya miktzat alav megulim, as long as some of the leaves are above ground or revealed, then eno choshesh lo mishum klayim. You don't have to worry that maybe this lefet is to start growing with the grapes, and it's going to be two species growing together. But lo mishum shvi'it, you don't have to worry about shvi'it because you're not growing it, basically. You're just storing it underground as long as something is sitting up above ground. But Rashi says you don't really need the thing above ground. But anyways, it's a Mishnah in shvi'it, in klayim, sorry. The lo mishum ma'aser, you don't have to worry about taking ma'aser. But continues the Mishnah, the nitlan b'Shabbat. You can take them out on Shabbat. Let's say Shabbat afternoon you get hungry. You remember, oh, I got some radishes in my backyard. You go on Shabbat and pull them out. Now, clearly, this is not a situation where you're taking them in and out, right? The dirt must be hard. And clearly, the Mishnah still says you're allowed to pull it out on Shabbat because the leaves are already outside, so it's not growing. And to Yufta, in fact, it's a proof that you don't have to worry about putting things into hard dirt on Shabbat. It's okay to put something in hard dirt on Shabbat as long as you're not digging or the goal of what you're doing is not to make a hole in the ground. And that's, in fact, how we posture. Okay?
Amazing.
So tomorrow morning at 7:30, God willing?
Yes. Eli, are you good in Rashi Tevot?
I think so.
Okay. There's a Rashi Tevot I don't understand. Just a second.
Okay, sure.
In all these final cases, would Rashbag say that it's okay with just machshava without doing the in and out and making a designated hole?
No.
Is it a different type of muksa?
So it's not a question of muksa. The concern here is that as you take this thing out, you're causing the dirt to basically collapse on the thing.
Right, but we said with the box with the insulation was muksa, therefore you didn't want to touch it.
Right. So the concern with the box, Rav Shimon Gamliel, everyone agrees with the box that you can't make a hole again. Rav Shimon Gamliel is saying is that even if you take out the pot and the insulation doesn't move, we make a takana that we're afraid you're going to actually, if it does collapse, you're going to move it aside.
But Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said you can touch muksa as long as you thought about it, moving it before. Oh, but that's just if it's for a different purpose.
You're mixing metaphors here. So that's a different point.
Okay.
What Shimon said before is that if you say I'm using this as insulation, then it's not muksa. What we're talking about here is where it's insulation that is muksa, which might be because, remember, we said in the beginning before you came, if it's professional grade, it becomes muksa, it stays muksa. You're saying if it's muksa, the question is, can you take something out, and are you worried that it's going to collapse and you're going to move?
So if you filled this,
I see.
if you thought about some non-traditional type of insulation before Shabbat, you could fill this box with that insulation on Shabbat.
And move it on Shabbat, yes.
Interesting.
Yes. Via, what is the Rashi Tevot?
Yes, the Rashi Tevot is Shin, Vav, Lamed, Aleph, Shin. I looked in the book of the Rashi Tevot and didn't.
Can you tell me the sentence maybe?
Yes, so basically a rabbi said, Haolam, Kol Haolam Kulo Nivra, Ela Letzavet Leze. Ze is a man who do the Retzon Hashem. So Letzavet Leze. So Rashi explained, Letzavet, Lufta, Shin, Va. So to accompany that word. The whole world was created to accompany, to be like the stage of that man. So, Letzavet, Lufta, Shin, Vav, Lamed, Aleph, Shin. It's in Shabbat, Amud, Lamed, Daf Lamed, Shabbat. We studied it a week ago, so Shin, Vav, Lamed, Aleph Shin, but it's okay. It's a very difficult one. I'm pretty good in Rashi Tevot, but it's in Lamed Amud Bet, Daf Lamed Amud Bet.
That's where the Rashi is?
That's the Rashi. It's in the Rashi, yes. That it's come to explain. Yes.
Where is it on the DAF?
No, I haven't.
Top?
I don't know the answer. I don't think that's a Rashi Tevot. I think it's a word in French.
Ah, it's a word in French.
I think it's a Rashi. I think it's a Laz.
Livia, do you know French?
Yes. So
Does that word mean anything in French?
Shulash. Shulash. I don't know what it is. Okay, in any case, I understand lufta. Lufta means to lelavot, yes, to, it's like my name actually, Livia. So, to accompany that man, the whole world was created to be the accompaniment of that man.
Correct.
It's very homocentric, very homiletic. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So hopefully I'll see everyone tomorrow morning at
I don't know.
7:30.
So it's good because
Okay.
it means that I don't know how to differentiate a Rashi Tevot and a Laaz. Now I'll try to be more mindful about that. Thank you.
Okay, Shabbat Tov, everyone.
Shavua Tov.
Thank you. It's a skill that I need to have. Thank you. Bye bye.
Yeah.
Shavua Tov.
Shabbat
Bye
Tov.
bye.